right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, yWhales community. Cliff Oertli here, yWhales advisor. And with me, I have Mr. John Paller to talk about Opolis. Um, John, why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit? And I think one thing I'm always curious about is how the heck did you get into Web3? And maybe tell us a little bit about Buffercorn and side gig you have running, maybe the largest Ethereum conference in the world.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Cliff. I appreciate it. So my name's John Paller. I'm the founder of Opolis and also the founder and steward of ETH Denver, which is, as you mentioned, the world's largest Web3 event that happens annually in February, March in Denver, obviously by the name. I got into Web3 progressively, but early. So I was in a different startup in the HR tech space back in 2013, 2014. And I was at a technology conference or an entrepreneurs conference in California. And I randomly met a guy by the name of Dima Buterin at that conference. Fairly small, intimate affair. So he and I spent quite a bit of time together talking, tech and entrepreneurship and family and all this stuff. And I didn't have any idea that he was the father of Vitalik Buterin at the time, but we made fast friends and talked a little bit about Bitcoin, but just really kind of stayed in touch on social media. And then I started seeing all the posts about Ethereum, and I reached out and said, hey, I'm kind of curious about what this is. And he sent me the white paper and some other stuff, and kind of sat with me for a while, and I didn't really do much about it. But then I kept hearing more about blockchain tech and all of smart contracts and all of this, and it started hitting the VC buzz lexicon. And so I had some use case ideas that I reached out and said, hey, I got some use cases I'm interested in discussing with Vitalik. Would you introduce me? And he said, well, I can introduce you, but I can't guarantee he'll even respond because, he doesn't talk to me half the time. I'm like, okay, well, fine. That's okay. I don't care. And within a half an hour, he responded, and we were rapid fire responding to each other. And we spent half a day, an entire afternoon talking about these use cases that were terrible in hindsight, but he was very gracious about it. And it sort of recalibrated my direction on what I was thinking about and how I was thinking about Web3 tech. I was originally thinking about it like most technology, which is more of an efficiency capture. How do we create more efficiencies in our processes, and how do we in our communities and whatever. And what I realized was, well, blockchains are kind of slow, dumb, and expensive, but this is really about a social shift. So once I actually got that, it was like bells and whistles and lights going off, because since 2005, I've been on the track of attempting to democratize employment. So that's originally what attracted me to the talking points of Web3 and blockchains, was this democratization, decentralization, but I didn't really understand the constructs and the paradigm shift that it represented. I didn't have any clue about that, much less how we were going to do this. So then as I was digging and digging and digging, I had that red pill moment, and it was just like, holy crap, everything's going to totally change. So in 2016, I basically started the process of divesting myself of everything that I had built for almost, pushing 20 years, 15, 16 years at the time. And I parlayed it in 2017 into what was the seedling Opolis. We didn't really know what our use case was going to be or how we were going to go about democratizing employment, but we knew that we were going to do it. And we started about a 1.5 to 2 year research project on economic models and monetary policy, legal frameworks, and all this stuff to try to figure out how to approach this HR tech sector, but from a Web3 standpoint. And then we landed on the idea. Originally, we were thinking about marketplaces and job boards and things like that, and how people find work. But we realized that the real magic happens at the protocol layer of employment, which is the legal relationship between the employer and employee. So unless you fundamentally shift that, none of the other stuff is ever going to shift because the corporations will always control it. And their best interest from a game design standpoint are not to democratize employment and, hand everybody the keys to their information and their data and their time and their freedom. And, the things that people want in the work world today are freedom and flexibility. Well, that's not necessarily in the best interest of the corporations, especially if the corporations are taking all the risk.
Right.
So you got some conflicts there that you've got to sort out. And so we started really honing in on that. So that's how I got into Web3. That's how Opolis was started. And it's, like I said, it's a progressive decentralization of John.
Yeah, but I love it. I mean, and I love kind of that red pill moment too. Your observation that really blockchain is just big, dumb, slow, expensive databases.
It's tools.
Like
it's just tools.
If people are trying to, a lot of the use cases I see are just taking, DBA work and putting on blockchain. I was like, that's inefficient. That's not what it was.
No, that's the enterprise approach, right? So the enterprise approach to blockchains like Hyperledger and such was always really dumb once I got it.
Yeah.
Because once I got it, I was like, no, no, why are we putting databases
on multiple computers, multiple nodes, copying the same data everywhere? It's really inefficient from like a data usage query standpoint, but the value comes in, as you mentioned, and democratization.
Yeah, and if you talk about like federated collaboration, where you got a bunch of corporations, collaborating their data. That still doesn't mean that the data should be owned by any of these corporate actors. Like, it's a complete miss, in my opinion, on, and frankly, a bastardization of what blockchains are intended to do, which is really decentralize and disintermediate, right?
Right. And that's, when I got in about 10 years ago into the Web3 crypto world. And really at that time, the only use case was, digital payments and digital storage of wealth.
Yeah.
And it helped a lot of developing and developed nations, people to kind of escape despotic fiat currency regimes, to escape hyperinflation, things of that nature. Then you kind of have like the DeFi summer, where we can start democratizing access to capital and banking and financing tools. And then we have kind of the NFTization type, the JPEG, but also
creator
like
economy,
identity.
yeah,
and that, and so it's really cool to see with Opolis and others like being able to leverage this, decentralization, democratization technology in other verticals that might be a little bit harder to tackle.
Well, they're harder to tackle, but you couldn't do it without the set of primitives that have been built, right? So the primitives had to get built, and they're still being built. I wouldn't say that we're done building primitives. Like DID is still a work in progress. There's a lot of protocols and people working on it, but like there's not a standard, like a gold standard that's been set yet.
So within the gig work and independent contractor and remote work type economy, how did you guys decide on how to position Opolis? And maybe talk us through a couple of the business cases or ideas that you guys looked at that maybe didn't make as much sense, and why you landed on the model that you guys are on right now.
Well, this is I could literally probably spend a half an hour on this question, but I'll sum it up for you. So, the big thing that is scary but core to any innovation that happens in HR tech around this is employer of record.
Yeah.
If you're not taking responsibility, or if you're not solving for employer of record in a more democratized way, where you're really giving ownership of employer of record to the individual somehow, and then whilst still not like making it a disadvantage to be doing that to them, right? So you can't, from a trade-off standpoint, you can't say, oh, well, now you own your employment, but you get absolutely nothing in terms of fringe benefits or any of this other stuff. You got to do both, right? So it's the genius of the and, not the tyranny of the or, to quote Jim Collins. And so what we were saying is like, okay, So the trade-off right now is if I want to subjugate myself to a corporation, I get in exchange for that a steady paycheck, and I get proof of income, I get W-2, pay stubs, I get healthcare insurance, group healthcare, I get a bunch of cool stuff, but I don't get my freedom and flexibility. I get told what to do, where to do it from, and when it needs to get done, and who to work with, and all this other stuff. So like, it's very asymmetrical, and it's a huge trade-off, right? So just to own my time, I got to give up everything else, right? And now I would argue as an amateur social anthropologist that this is by design, that the corporations and the big money interests that could effectuate some sort of change don't really want you to leave that corporate apparatus, because they are arbitraging your time as a worker for profit. And if all the workers left, then the way things are right now, they see it as a huge disadvantage to them. Now, with the advent of AI, they might start thinking differently, but you know, the way that it is right now, that's the way most people think. So we said, well, how do we give people the benefit of both worlds, the best of both, right? So give them their freedom and flexibility, but then replicate the feeling of employment so that they can work from where, with whom, and how much they choose without having to make these huge trade-off sacrifices. I can have great health care at a reasonable cost. I can have my time and my freedom. I can get access to good retirement plans. It's all portable to me. I control it. I'm not getting permission from somebody else. You know, as long as I check a couple of small boxes and pay my bill to my, you know, my community, I can do all of these things my way. Okay, I can.
Well, and having traveled the world myself, I mean, one of the most odd things about the U.S. is that we tie our health insurance and our retirement to our employers. Versus like owning that as part of who we are and taking it with us wherever we choose.
Having portability, and the European Union, the EU, isn't the only fundamental difference there is you're really just getting it funded more in the social aspect, like healthcare, for example. It's just unbundled, but it's government run. You know, there's a lot of arguments against that approach, but what we're doing is something kind of in the middle. So what we're doing is saying, okay, with the tools and resources that are available, how do we architect a solution, a comprehensive solution that replicates almost, I mean, down to the T, the experience, the semi-weekly payroll, everything, to where it's more of a set it and forget it sport for the independent worker, but they're not compromising on the quality of these other things. And they have this shared services apparatus that they can resource anytime they want to help them answer questions or just navigate this world as a solopreneur. Because we have this for large corporations. You know, large corporations have huge shared services departments that do all of this stuff for people. So we're just saying, well, why can't you just, you know, the independent worker community is intensely fragmented, tens of millions of people. Why can't we create a system that allows, you know, people to have their cake and eat it too, right? So that's what we did.
They can focus on their craft, and then you guys provide the shared
and that way they're not going, well, I don't know what to, you know, quarterly tax payments, what, 941 filing, what, like monthly or, you know, weekly tax payments as in for employees, what, or paying super high fees with like Gusto or whatever, like, you know, I'm paying $4,000 a year for this, like, well, is that worth it? Nah, I'm just gonna YOLO. And it's like, it's probably not the best.
You guys can leverage. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's probably not the best strategy to do that. But yes, we can leverage the procurement power and economies of scale, because a lot of this is repetitious for us. I mean, it's, you know, it's kind of the same for everybody. And once you have the knowledge and the know-how and the expertise and you build the automations around this, you can plug in thousands of people and just run it through. And then everybody's kind of getting the best of everything.
Yeah. So you guys had an example on your site of Jen getting a $72,000 paycheck and how that would work. But, you know, walk me through if Cliff wanted to go sign up with Opolis, as an independent contractor, own my own employment, and then go work for, some XYZ company
Work with.
as a freelancer.
Work with.
Yeah. Work with. Yeah. Right.
For.
Yeah. So
with. This is working for. This is working with. Right? Mutualistic
I love it.
type of relationships is another thing that pops out of this. So let's say I'm a independent software developer and I'm working on various projects in Web3. I could even be a real estate agent. I could be a day trader. I could be a bunch of different things. It kind of doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many revenue streams you have or how many DAOs you contribute to or whatever it is that you're doing or how many homes you sell. But if you're independent, in other words, you're usually a 1099 employee for whoever you're working with. The first thing that we're going to do is wrap you in an S corp. So this starts with an LLC, typically Delaware or Wyoming, and depending on the flavor that you prefer, and then you elect S corp status at the federal level. Now this puts you into a different taxation type of category bracket, okay? And you're treated differently from a taxation standpoint. And there's rules around that. I'm not going to get into it, but we help navigate all of that. And then let's say your company is bringing in $200,000 equivalent in total receipts, like revenue, right? So your business, when your business transacts with another business, which is B2B, that's called revenue, not income. It's not income yet. It's not net income to the business. It's not income to you individually because the business is earning revenue. Now, let's say out of that, I'm playing a little bit of tax games here for maximizing my payroll tax or, optimizing my payroll tax liabilities. Then I'm only going to pay myself $100,000 out of that $200K in terms of the salary. So every 2 weeks or twice a month in our case, it's the first Friday and the third Friday of the month. I'm going to join Opolis. My S Corp is going to become the member. I'm the only employee of that entity because as an S Corp, I can create a bona fide employment relationship with myself, essentially. I can allocate $100,000 salary. The employer paid taxes are coming from my entity in addition to whatever fringe benefits I elect, so healthcare, life insurance, 401k, whatever I'm doing. So then as I join Opolis, I have an option to choose all of those things there's 4 different health plans that are all PPOs. They're all very high quality. We've designed them ourselves. I'm on the health plan myself, just for example, because I wouldn't ever put something into the market that I wouldn't be willing to use myself.
Yep.
And so we're very discerning. It's not just, we didn't make the health plans for profit actually. So there's no incentive for us,
there's no delta there, right? You guys, that's not how you're making your money.
Right. The only way that we make money is a 1% community sustainability fee on the total consumption for payroll and everything in the processing. But the healthcare plan itself, the retirement, we're not taking VIGs on any of that stuff. So as I join, I go through an onboarding process where I elect all these various benefits or I decline them. It's completely optional. It can totally modular based on your particular personal situation. You're not forced into anything. And you go through and then it'll pop out a number at the end that you need to put a deposit down based on whatever you've elected. And then that's essentially, when you do a rental contract for an apartment, it's like your last month's rent. It's kind of the same thing with this. It's like your last month's health care. Yep. Because if for whatever reason you didn't pay your bill, we would just draw on that and we would notify you, hey, you gotta renew this deposit account. If you don't, then we're going to terminate your membership, and then we'll just cease services. Your employment still stays intact with your entity, but we're just ceasing services as it relates to co-employment and the actual payroll processing and shared services access that you have. So it's very inexpensive as it relates to what's else out there in the market. B2B, sometimes are charging up to 5%, 6% of total payroll. In a staffing situation, from a markup standpoint, they could be charging 20, 25%.
Yeah.
So we've cut out all the intermediary costs and just, focus on scale. So our North Star metric is, creating more payroll volume, which is incentivizing referrals and bringing new people. But as you join, you also become a member owner. It's cooperative. So it's not like there's some third party benefiting from all of this. You benefit from this success. So it creates a very symmetrical experience. So when people are talking about Opolis, they're like, oh my God, I'm saving $300 a month on my family's healthcare insurance. I got better 401k options. I've got proof of insurance now. I can rent that apartment in New York that I wanted to get. And my life is kind of normal now, but I've got my freedom intact. I didn't have to go back to the corporate mill to get my normalcy, right? I've now got my normalcy, but in my independent world that I've designed for myself. And
now, how do you guys handle just the multiple jurisdictions? And I see right now it's U.S. based. You guys are expanding into parts of
Canada. Yeah, we're already in Canada. Yeah.
Okay, nice. But so my actual business right now, we have a couple hundred employees, and we have 35 plus states with employees, and numerous cities and counties within that. How do you deal with the payroll complexities of that type of exposure? Whether it's like sick time accruals or city taxes or all that kind of stuff.
Software. I mean, it's there's some really brilliant softwares out there that we've either built or borrowed or we lease, right, from other places, and we've cobbled it together into a system that basically we plug in numbers, plug in a jurisdiction zip code, and it pops out the tax liabilities. So, like, we know, I mean, we've been doing this a long time. So in a previous life, part of the reason why I'm probably aptly qualified to do this is I built a big staffing company in Colorado here. And at one point we were W-2ing, over 1,000 people per week. And,
wow.
we were doing 43 states and, all over the place. We had various Department of Labor audits and other stuff that teach you a lot about what you need to do. We never had any employee classification file flipped, meaning we never misclassified anybody as a 1099, but they should have been in W-2 because we were always doing things by the book. So we got really good at understanding kind of how this stuff works, both federally, state, and local jurisdictions. And we also got to know all the different softwares and things that you need to plug these things in to make them work right. So for us, it's kind of second nature. Now, the average entrepreneur or software developer doesn't know shit about shit.
Right.
And even if you're a small business owner that's growing your small business, you don't know shit about shit, and you're like, well, I don't know about any of this stuff. So you got to learn it. Now in the B2B world, you've got your Gustos and your JustWorks and your ADPs and Paychecks and these other traditional sort of B2B models, right? That's all fine and good. But what if I'm a solopreneur?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to touch you. Okay. No, they won't touch you. So that's where we fit, right? There's 35, 40 million independent workers nationally, just nationally right now that need something similar to what's available to the B2B world, but nobody wants to provide it because it doesn't, make enough money and the sales cycle is different. And the economies of scale and the cost of acquisition are not good. And so we've just said, forget all that. And we've Web3ized it. And in terms of legal structure, ownership model, incentive, game design, tokenization, and product suite to make the whole thing work to where people are incentivized to build the community, not just us by our own work, but the entire community is like, well, we need more members. Yeah. And they go, well, I got a friend that's a real estate agent, or I got a friend who's an independent chiropractor or a massage therapist or traveling nurse or an independent clergyman or whatever, Twitch streamers, YouTube influencers, and we got it all. We have it all. So
So I actually want to get to the tokenization in a second, the work token. But one last question on the vision of providing a shared service backend for the solopreneurs. Do you guys have on a roadmap things like business insurance, legal advice, bookkeeping, like some of the other back office functions that corporations provide?
Yeah, everything. So for both the business of the individual and the individual themselves, our product roadmap includes the entire life cycle of everything that you might need to touch. So from billing and collections to accounting to the tax returns for your business, plus the payroll, the individual tax returns, accounting for your individual stuff, as well as other tangential tools that might be, assisting in that. So yeah, the idea is to create Opolis is not just a payroll and employment benefits platform, but the command center for
Yeah.
your entire commercial experience, right? So banking, loans, employment, job boards, groups, meetups, whatever. You could plug into this experience and have all of your documentation, all of my forms, all my tax stuff, everything in one area. But the engine that makes it go, most of that other tangential stuff is all provided for free. It's like the loss leader stuff. It's like we can do all that stuff for free at scale because 1% on 1 million people prints cash. And we don't need to maximize profit per member. We're maximizing by because the total addressable market's so big, if we go out and get a couple million members, it easily pays for all of itself.
Yep. Well, let's talk the work token. I saw you guys are on Polygon. You had about 315 million Genesis tokens. Mm-hmm. It looks like about 2,000 unique wallet addresses now. But just talk to us about what that token is, how it's distributed, not privately sold to investors. Like, what's the vision or tokenomics and purpose of the token?
So the token is a coordination mechanism. So the great invention of Web3, in my opinion, is the community token. And the reason for that is because it allows a new paradigm of economic models and incentive structures to exist that doesn't exist today in the traditional model of corporations or even groups or even co-ops.
Right.
Good example is Uber drivers. It doesn't matter how many rides you do. There is no economic incentive aside from the compensation you earn for the ride itself. There's no upside. And so if you look at Uber's P&L and what their largest expenditure is every year, it's driver acquisition. Why? Because they don't treat their drivers very well when it comes to the grand scheme of things. If I'm Andreessen Horowitz and I put $10 million into Uber's, or they did Lyft actually, but if I put it into Lyft and I get, 300 million or 1.3 billion out of the deal, when they go public, how much does the average Uber driver get? Nothing.
Yeah.
Okay. So but who really built that?
The driver.
The drivers built it. And I mean, you can't say that Uber wasn't smart and very clever on a bunch of different things that they did. And I'm not saying they didn't deserve upside in value, but it seems disproportionate. If I put 10 million in, I get 1.3 billion, but the average driver gets 0. And you didn't even try to hey, we're going to airdrop a bunch of money. You're going to have to claim it as a bonus or something, but we're going to give the drivers a reward for this. No, never. Okay. They didn't do it. And this is the capitalism 1.0 rearing its ugly head and why we have such complaints about the disparities that exist in the working class versus the investor class. It's obvious, but it's not just obvious from a moral standpoint. It's obvious from an economics and sustainability standpoint. Do you really think that Uber's business model is sustainable if drivers are the key to this? Well, they know that it's not, which is why they're working on driverless cars, because otherwise they have no business model later down the road. So they're banking everything on being able to replace humans with essentially their own version of AI. And will they be successful? I don't know. It hasn't been going very well so far. The driverless car stuff, it's not going very well.
I did a presentation on driverless cars 30 years ago in elementary school. So so John, one thing I think about with the driverless cars is, there's that quote that some things that we think will take years take decades, and some things we think take decades will take years. And I just think that's kind of in that space. But going back to Opolis and your guys' kind of go-to-market strategy, I think one thing I really respect about what you guys are doing is that you have this Web3 spirit, this democratization spirit, being able to allow folks to own their own employment. And we're leading with the solution to that problem, not leading with NFT this, token that, Web3 that, blockchain this. And I feel like some people are just kind of shilling Web3, maybe for press or media or something like that. But you guys are actually trying to solve a problem. Talk to me about the idea behind even though you're one of the founders of ETH Denver, not leading with Web3, leading with Polygon, leading with blockchain, but leading with the solution.
Yeah, so I've been critical of the space since I got in, that it was like, look, I'm a pretty smart guy, and all this buzzword bingo that we play in Web3 is really confusing, protocol speak, dork speak, it's like the average person doesn't understand any of this stuff. Okay, so if we're talking, we need to get to a place of mass adoption, we can't be talking like this. Right. Okay, no one's ever going to get it. Can you imagine an early internet conference? Oh, TCP/IP is going to be the future. No, it's HTTPS. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Excuse my French. Right. But like, nobody understands what an NFT is, or like a DAO, or those are the low hangers. Those are the easy ones, right? Yep. And so, like, when we built Opolis, we realized that the total addressable market inside of crypto is pretty small, actually, when you talk about the grand scheme of things. And we saw Opolis more as a mass adoption tool. But if we're going to do that, it's not about educating people. I have a saying, you cannot educate your way to mass adoption. Right. You got to show people, not educate them, not make them smarter so they'll choose it. But no, you got to make it cheaper, better, faster. Just like any other revolution in the past, when you talk about technology adoption, cheaper, better, faster. Okay, there's a reason why cars beat the horse, and there's a reason why electricity beat the kerosene. There's a reason why these things become what they become. Blu-rays didn't even stick around that long because streaming was already on its heels, right? Like, by the time Blu-rays came out, streaming was already being worked on. And everybody knew that streaming was going to be the thing, instead of, like, I was talking about, like, what's up with this DVD collection stuff that people used to do? Like big walls of DVDs. I'm going to go pick one out. It's like, wouldn't it be cool if there was just a computer server that you could log into, that you had access to all these DVDs that you owned, and you just pay a monthly subscription to have access to this stuff? I was talking about that way before Netflix even became, like, or any of this stuff was doing like what they're doing.
Yeah, I built in college. I actually built a Myth TV Ubuntu media server that we deployed videos across the entire campus. So we had like an early, peer-to-peer streaming service in college.
Exactly,
and it was way better than renting.
Yeah. So to answer your question more directly about why we chose to approach the product positioning the way that we did, is because people don't care about that stuff. What they care about is, hey, can you save me some money and give me some better healthcare coverage? Because the problem they're discussing with their spouse is, like, they went to the open exchange. He wants to leave his corporate job, but she's freaked out about not having good healthcare insurance, but they can't find anything that's adequate. And she's saying, there's no way you're leaving that job until we find something that's suitable and as a replacement. And as a servant to his family, he's like, okay, I get it. I can't do that. So it's like he's sort of then pinned into this crappy situation when it just seems really unnecessary, because he wants to be doing something else. He doesn't really have the choice to leave. Right. So yeah, he has the choice to do whatever he wants, I suppose. But like functionally, it's sort of a pseudo choice. Right. It's not really a choice. Yeah. It's so anyways, we positioned it this way because we're trying to talk to the problem that people actually have. A lot of people don't even know that we were born in crypto. They don't know that, which is great, and it's perfectly fine with me. The term Opolis isn't a crypto term. It's not like, protocols and all this kind of stuff, this lingo that pops up. No, we don't do any of that stuff. Okay. We are solving real problems for real people. We've disintermediated the corporate overlords that are, typically making these decisions for their employees. And instead, we're enabling and empowering the individual to take ownership of their own employment structure and have that fluidity to work from where, with whom, and how much they choose. Now, whatever they decide is up to them, but the game is set. The game design is such that they're now incentivized to do good work. They're incentivized to express more creatively and be more competitive, because in order to survive in an entrepreneurship world, you've got to do those things. You can't just hide in the corporate machine. So the game design is very nicely positioned the way that we've built it. And, the people that are ready or have already taken the leap to solopreneurship that need these support services, this is an obvious thing for them. There's not a lot of selling that goes on with this. I mean, there's like, oh, wait, you can save me money and give me better healthcare, and the cost that I would pay gets covered by that savings, plus I get to pocket some money. Plus, I don't have to worry about any of this other crap, and I get a W-2, I get regular pay stubs, I look like a normal person.
Right.
Cool. I'm in. What's the catch?
Yeah.
And it's like, there is no catch, because the catch is usually hidden in, well, how you making all your money? How you exploiting us, right? But because we're community owned, because we're individual owned, because we're member owned, there's no BS, because we only exist to serve the best interests of our membership. It's not different than we're like REI for employment. When you go buy skis and stuff, they're trying to negotiate the best price possible, because at the end of the year, any profits are going to come back to you anyways.
Right.
So what do you care if you're paying a little bit more, because you're just going to get it back later?
Well, awesome. So if I wanted to get started with Opolis as either an employee member or coalition member, what's my next step that I would take? And maybe just describe the difference of the different types of ways I can engage with Opolis and support the community.
Yeah, so this is an important distinction here, and I'll explain kind of the difference between the two membership classes. So in a cooperative, we call ourselves a digital employment cooperative in kind of normie land speak. It sort of signifies that we're like this next generation cooperative. So as I mentioned, the work rewards, or the token rewards, are only available to those who are members. So you have to be either a coalition member or an employee member. And it's done based on your contribution, or what we call in the co-op world, patronage to the community. So as a coalition member, you're not an active sort of employee consuming payroll, insurance, et cetera, but you're like an ally, call it. You could be a trade association as a group. You could be an individual who just really champions the idea of people being independently working, but you're not, for whatever reason, not equipped yourself to be a member. But I can refer people. I can earn rewards by their consumption, right? So I get credit. Let's say I referred you as a coalition member. I'm going to get credit for whatever you consume. And then if I refer a bunch of other people, I could be getting credit for 10 or 20 or 50 people, and I'm earning equity essentially through these tokenized rewards for doing that. Now, it's patronage, so it's not technically equity, but because I'm entitled to profits based on my ownership of these tokens in the co-op based on my patronage contribution of referrals, it acts like that, because on a pro rata basis, when the time comes, based on my percentage ownership of tokens of the total supply in circulation, I will get my pro rata distribution of patronage profits when it comes time, like the REI example. So the other side of this is an employee member. So an employee member is somebody who's actively consuming payroll, healthcare, whatever services. This person's getting a paycheck from the employment commons. So that's the major distinction. Now, this person can still make referrals, but in addition to getting credit for those that they refer, they're getting credit for their own consumption. So back to the coalition thing, if I referred you, not only am I getting credit for your consumption, but you are too. It's coming from a separate bucket, referrals and direct consumption, but it's still that you're getting, there's a waterfall distribution that happens. Every 10% that we grow is our inflation model. So it's not based on time or just periodic consumption. It's based on growth, which creates the right alignment of incentive for everybody to be thinking about growth, right? Because we're like, okay, well, how many members do we need to get to this next level of growth? And, how do we activate that? right? How do we get that? Well, we need X amount of referrals to drive X amount of members, which drives X amount of payroll. And it's a fairly simple equation, but we try to give people as much transparency to that as possible so that they can act accordingly, right? So as our network gets bigger, it grows and grows and grows, and then we replicate what's called the network effect, which is what you need to build a community like this.
Nice. And so my next step as either an employee or coalition member would just be go to the
website. There's a form there that you can sign for either one and say, look, I'm interested in this. And then what happens typically is there's like a handful of questions, like really low level questions, just to make sure that we understand who you are and you're talking to the right person. And then from there, you'll be given the opportunity to set up a call with the membership steward, who will then give you the details. We are working on automating a lot of the detail work and automating this sort of educational process so that way you can kind of self-serve it and you don't have to talk with somebody. The inflow sometimes, like right after ETH Denver, for example, was like so busy we couldn't even talk to everybody. So we're trying to get to a place where we've automated the content and automated the educational process of that initial learning. The phase one learning. There is always going to be an element of this, given how intimate it is, that eventually if you're like, hey, I'm ready to join, you'll still talk to a membership steward. But that sort of, inquisition to, the initial sort of fact-finding stuff is going to be entirely automated, probably sometime this year. But that's where you go. Opolis.co is the website. There's really interesting content on there. There's, a bunch of old podcasts and blogs and things that we've written. There's some how-to tutorials. There's a bunch of other informational stuff on there about who we are, what we do. Again, there's no catch to any of this. There's no like, well, here's where we hide the profit, or here's what we do with this, or there's no reason to do any of that because we're community owned. We're member owned. So when you become a member, you become an owner, and that means a lot because the ownership mentality really shifts how we think about consuming services.
It does.
100%, completely shifts it.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, John, before we wrap up here today, I would just be curious, outside of Opolis, outside of ETH Denver, if you have any spare time beyond those two, what's exciting you about the Web3 space that you're seeing on the horizon?
Well, I always say that we're probably in the second inning of a 7-game series, to use a baseball analogy. As far as like timing, we're still really, really early. So like, what's interesting is we're kind of in a builder's market. We're in a builder's market right now. I wouldn't even call it a bear market because I think that is not the appropriate way to describe it. In a bear market, I wouldn't expect our attendance at ETH Denver to double this year.
Right.
So explain that to me. Okay, if you want to look at price exclusively, sure, it's a bear market. But if you want to talk about bidding or building, it's very much a bull market, right? Because this is the time that we put our heads down and we go after it. So the thing that excites me the most is, well, there's two parts. Well, there's one that's more symbolic, and then there's one more tangible. So I'll do both. The one that's more symbolic is, I think the genie's out of the bottle. We've finally gotten to a place of development and maturity and fidelity in the space that I don't think there's any going back. Now it's just a function of time until, one of the various loose bricks in the wall comes out, whether that's a nation state that adopts reserve currency as Bitcoin, not just use of Bitcoin, but reserve currency as Bitcoin, or it's some other huge global fundamental thing that happens. I don't think it's just based in the US. I think that there's a lot of moving parts and pieces here. But that excites me because, I think even 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said that the Web3 crypto blockchain space is very vulnerable and very fragile and could evaporate. I don't think that's the case now. I think there's too many interdependencies and other things that have gone on that and even retail investors getting involved and big hedge funds getting involved. And it's too big to fail in some ways, but I'm not even sure that it would get to that because its distributed nature by itself, I think, creates sustainability. So the genie's out of the bottle, and I think it's here to stay. And I think that represents a lot of hope The second thing that I think is really interesting, so I was posting about this the other day on Twitter, and my friend Ilya from Near Protocol tagged me in a tweet that he had made like, a day before or something, and I hadn't seen it. But I think there's a nexus between Web3 and AI that's coming. And we talk a lot about governance issues in Web3 and how we create better protocols for decision making and how we maintain benevolence and how we reduce attack vectors for whether it's a Sybil attack or it's something else. How do we actually protect these systems? Because humans are frail and humans make mistakes, and frankly, trustlessness is not a feature of human behavior. So we talk about code as law, and what is AI? It's code. And I think that there's going to be a huge amount of development around this fusion of these two technologies, specifically in organizing systems, that is going to come out over the next 18 months. And what can we do with an automated intelligence inside of communities that are well trained, not to be, to be trained to be neutral, not in just to run the code and to execute. So you talk about administrative functions that are already being abstracted away from corporations. What about the management of a DAO? What about the administrative functions of a DAO, right? Where it's like, okay, well, this treasury thing needs to be done. This proposal was passed. This needs to get executed. Like right now, we still depend on a human intermediary to function those transactions and to do those things. What if all of that was abstracted away to an AI intelligence that was only doing what it was instructed to do by the code? And so no human could touch it or mess with it or interfere with it. That's a really interesting development, because I think if we were able to do that, a lot of the complaints and troubles that we have in the concept of DAOs, decentralized, not really, autonomous, not really, an organization, not really. So what are they exactly? I think this is a good step in the direction of actually making DAOs more widespread and adoptable, even in homeowners associations and other things that might be typically a little bit messy, but they don't need to be, kind of thing. So I think that's the most exciting thing. And it's not there's not one particular use case that I'll point to. I think it's that nexus, that fusion in general, that is really interesting to me, and I think represents huge opportunity for the space.
That's awesome. Well, as a biddler in the space, it's always great to hear, your perspective on things. And the DAO thing especially resonates with me, because as a quasi member in some DAOs, a more active member in other DAOs, I would say the exception is a DAO that works well.
Most of them don't work well. In fact, I've even seen some DAO maximalists come out and say DAOs don't work. And I'm like, come on, guys. That's not the conclusion that you come to when you talk about an iterative process. What you do is you point out the things that are not working, and you look for, how do we solve maybe a new problem that we haven't seen before, an old problem with a new look, but how do we actually create tool sets to overcome that? And for example, AI isn't where they go, right? They just, it doesn't work. And it's like, well, that's because you're thinking about it this way, but what if this was possible? And it's like, then they don't even think about that. So it's like,
well, even the innovation of quadratic voting, it's like a revolutionary game changer in terms of getting kind of votes that people kind of have skin in the game on as well. Is another really cool innovation. Just little things like that I think, DAOs are going to be a lot more influential in the future.
DAO tooling, we're in the beginning season of DAO tooling. So DAOs in general have existed, but there was no tools, there was no infrastructure, there was no way to do anything. So then you got Snapshot and a few other things that show up, and it's like, okay, but cobble together.
Yeah. Discourse.
But now you've got Safe building some interesting things. You've got who's really well funded. You've got people building on top of Safe. You've got other things that are happening throughout the ecosystem. You've got DAO House v3 that's just launched, which is a completely modular DAO framework system that you can put your own UI on top of. You've got all sorts of really and new things that are popping out. that it's like, and some of the things that they've come up with, when I say they, I mean the community, is just genius stuff. Now it's still nascent, it's still early, it's not proven. Will it work? Will it not work? Will it be adopted? I don't know. But out of this sort of noise is going to come the recipe, the template. It's not different than like, C Corps just didn't come out of the bag as like the thing that we use, like C Corps were invented.
Yep.
And somebody said, hey, we could do A, B, and C with this particular framework, maximize profits, protect shareholder interests, create securities rules, et cetera, and it's developed over a long period of time. Like, that just didn't happen. It was a developmental process. The same thing is going to happen in Web3. And once that template is set, and once it's proven that it works, you're going to see it applied to pretty much everything. Legal framework, value accrual, value distribution, membership, regulatory, like all of it in one bag. And then people are going to go, oh, well, that could be applied to this. And then boom, boom, boom. And it's going to be everywhere.
Yeah. Well, John, thank you again for your time today. Thank you for introducing the yWhales community to Opolis and what you guys are building. And thank you also for just your contribution to the Web3 space with East Denver. As a Denver native, I love it. It is part of my annual routine now. My wife just knows not to talk to me that weekend.
It's Super Bowl weekend. You don't talk to me, babe. I love you,
yeah,
but
exactly.
I'm busy doing my Buffacorn thing right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So we got opolis.co. How else can folks get a hold of you if they want to engage with you? Or
Twitter's
Opolis?
the best. I'm at Paler John on Twitter. So that's the intro handle I have in my name here on the podcast. And that's probably the best way. You can follow me there. And, through opolis.co, you can also eventually get to me at some point. But Twitter's usually where I hang out. I don't usually do too much outside of that.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you, John. Thank you, yWhales community. And we look forward to hearing all from you guys at the next podcast. So good night, guys.